All right, welcome to the Run4Ben Podcast. I'm Mike Piccirillo. Joining me, Jamen Spitzer on location. Tell us more about your situation there.
Yeah. Welcome to the Run4Ben Podcast. I'm goofing around with my microphone right now because definitely had some tech issues getting this set up because I am in location at the Drake Hotel here in Chicago. I'm here with the Phoenix. I'm volunteer manager, which is a staff position with the Phoenix. The Phoenix is a sober, active community, which we will talk about in episode 2. So I look over Illinois as well as Michigan, and I'm here to meet with some partners this weekend, as well as we're having a volunteer get together. It's a whole volunteer run nonprofit. So I'm here to hang with some of the volunteers, go to the events, and I got my bike like right behind me. I was biking around today, but now it's snowing. So yeah, that's what I'm doing here in Chicago.
Let's get into the episode. This is episode 2, Off and Running. Takes place primarily kind of late September 2020. And we start the episode. You're on your 14-mile run and you're 11 weeks into your training.
Yeah, which was funny to see that because I had that blue scarf. It was during the pandemic, and I remember at that time, even going out, if I ran by somebody, I would have to be like, "Hey, how you doing? Good to see you." It's because that was, so I had that. It was still warm out. Now the good thing is I still have those. They work really well in the winter when it's freezing cold. But at that time, yeah, it was the pandemic and the 14-miler. So it was fun. It's so it's what is it, 2026 now? So the pandemic is behind, but what a wild time that was, man.
It's stunning to see how far we've come from it. But it's also, when you're watching this, this docuseries, especially this beginning part where we're right smack dab in it. In a lot of ways, in all ways, it was the catalyst for this whole experience, because it's interesting to kind of think about the what ifs of if COVID didn't happen. There's so many things you can think of, but regarding this specifically, it's like, where would we have both been? I don't know if this would have happened at all.
And we talked about that during filming too, that we knew that this was going to be a piece of, of history during the pandemic, that was going to be one of the things that was going to be interesting. So being here 6 years later, and it is incredibly interesting, and other people have brought it up now, how detrimental the pandemic was for isolation for folks who couldn't get out of their house, who had Parkinson's, but couldn't get to their, support groups or the boxing classes or biking or running or all those type of things. Especially Kirk Gibson has the foundation now, that they wouldn't have been able to go there. And I was just there the other day, and there are people walking, eat and talking and having coffee and caregivers there. And it was an amazing experience. That would have been shut down and people would have just been at home. And that was the case. And it really, he talks about the progression of, Parkinson's really got worse for a lot of people.
It comes up that, one of the things about the pandemic for people who have Parkinson's, Parkinson's itself is already something that kind of can remove you from society a bit. And this just put it on steroids and made it even harder for those people to have whatever connections they could have, and people really suffered. I mean, people without Parkinson's had issues, so you can only imagine how much more they were feeling that.
One of the things that you could do, and that was, like you said, the catalyst for this, is one of the things I could do was run. And being 10 months sober, I knew that isolation like that was not great for, alcoholics, addicts, those type of things. So I quickly started working out and running and started that regimen, which is why I did the half marathon trail run, which is why then I signed up for the full marathon, So I could still go out. Gyms were closed, but I could still go out and run, So And trails, for the most part, were open. Sometimes they close trails, but you could go run on the road.
You mentioned multiple times, not only in this episode, but throughout the footage in general, the importance of that connection with your father during this time. And it's, it was a great thing. And I know we even have a clip of some FaceTiming. Tell me about the FaceTiming with your dad while you're running.
So we did a couple things where we did FaceTime Live, and, I would go on to Instagram Live or Facebook Live, whatever one we did. And then I would schedule a time that he could pop on and we could just talk about, Parkinson's, what it was like, what people don't see. Because a big reason we wanted to do this was my mom and myself and family, we just didn't know much about Parkinson's. So when my dad got it, it was just, we had no idea what was going to go on. I was tearing up and crying for like the first few months, just thinking like it was a death sentence. Like I didn't know, what was going to happen. I was going to lose my dad. I didn't know when. I mean, it was just so unaware of what to expect. I had no idea. So part of the reason for us to get on and talk about it was that hopefully people, and takes us to today, hopefully people see this and can connect and see what a family goes through and understand they're not alone, and see what it's like day to day. The good times, but also the struggles, which sometimes we just don't see. And not to put struggles there to be open and vulnerable, and to allow people to understand that they're not the only ones that go through tough time. Because much of like Instagram and Facebook, right, we only see the highlights of what goes on. And sometimes we tuck the bad portions away, or crop out what we don't like. And that's fine, but it's also when you're going through something like this, when something's going wrong, or you feel angry, or you're upset, like being mad at my dad for something, that was like annoying or frustrating, you feel like the biggest asshole in the world. But when you talk to other people that go through this, you understand as caregivers and as other people, like it's okay to have emotions. You're not a monster. You're not some, you go through all of these things. And if we show all of that, which forces us to be vulnerable, there's many times that I talked to you and was like, I don't want to film this, or I don't want to talk about this, But the whole reason we did it was to talk about not just those good times, not just the highlight of running a marathon, but what it was like day to day. So those, live moments allowed us to connect, and for people to hopefully learn a little bit more about not just Parkinson's, but my dad, So
we see a couple of times where you are processing. The first one is it's during the 14-mile run, I believe, and you're discussing your father, who was diagnosed at 52. And at that time of the recording, he was then 62, and you had just turned 40 that past March, and you were kind of like ruminating on the genetic connections of Parkinson's. So tell me what you were processing on that run.
Yeah, it was just wild to think that, I didn't think about it. I didn't dwell on it a lot. But I would certainly be lying if I didn't think, what if I was diagnosed in 12 years? 12 years, that could be, what's left before I get the diagnosis. And I know people who were younger than that, who have been diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's disease. And that's when my dad was diagnosed. He could have, most likely had that before. It's just when it becomes more prominent, which was his leg was getting stiff, and that's where it noticed like kind of a limp is how we noticed it. So it was wild watching this episode, being 40 at that time, thinking about that, and now being 46. So if that was 12 years, that's cut in half right now. And again, not something I dwell on, but I think, anybody would be lying, not lying. I just think it's a common thing as you get older and you see your parents, aging. In this case, my dad getting Parkinson's and dealing with that and everything that came along with it. You start to see mortality in somebody that's closest to you. And that was the case with me and my dad, was seeing this. My dad, my hero, the guy I look up to, is like, they never beat him at ping pong and is the strongest guy and all of these things. And now he starts to lose that, when he starts to lose his speech and lose his ability to walk and lose his ability to play ping pong and rely more on others. I think it's one of those things like having a child. You can hear about it and you can know about it and you can understand it, but not in the full sense until you're in it, and so it's hard for me to explain the mortality thing and in not a morbid way, but sometimes just being like, shit, man, what if in 6 years I'm dealing with this, Before that, if my dad was healthy, I probably wouldn't be thinking about it as much because it's other people. It's away from me. When my dad has it, it's right there. Now I'm faced with it directly. So, I don't see. I still don't know I feel like I'm right back in that video because it's just I don't know what to say. There's no way to put it. At least for me, I don't. Yeah.
I mean, it's not. Yeah, obviously, there's no sugarcoating it, but it's
Yeah.
it's something that you notice because I know there was this 14-mile run and then there was a 20-mile run, and those were a week or so apart, if I'm correct. Does that sound about right?
Probably something like that. I don't know.
And the reason I mention that is because during your 20-mile run, we catch up with you and you say that, you're processing a lot and you're quoted as saying, I have a heavy heart. I know on top of the issues that we just spoke of, also, we know that you're going to be moving from North Hollywood to San Pedro because of your job.
Mm-hmm.
You can definitely hear, because you're just very stripped down and honest on the run about how you're just, you're running. So you're thinking about stuff and it weighs on you a little bit during this 20-mile run. So you're out doing this super long run. So you have so much time to think, and we see that.
Yeah. I have extra time to think because I'm not fast, but, those were really interesting. Those, long runs, especially that 20-miler, because I was, I worked up for that for weeks and weeks to get to where I could run 20 miles. And that was the first time I'd ever run 20 miles. That was a long distance, I've run it multiple times at this point, a whole lot of 20 milers at this point, and they get easier, I guess, because there's a frame of reference. But at that time, I was all pumped up about it. I think it was probably a Saturday or a Sunday where I ran that. And it was, I think I went off at 6 a.m. and I knew it was going to be a long time. And I was kind of like all geared up for it. And that was the weird thing. Sometimes, I guess it's not weird. But I would go out with this feeling of what I thought it was going to be. And then sometimes just being out there alone, especially during the pandemic, it's like quiet. There's not as much traffic, not as many people out in LA. So it's just quiet and my footsteps and hours to think. And I think at those moments, and it's still the same with my running, everything is just right there to think about. And I'm like all geared up and doing this, recording things. And then it hits me why I'm out there. It's, my dad's not doing well and he's across the country, and all of this creativity and like, you know, interesting or fun things to do, I'd rather not be doing them. You know, I don't want to be running 20 miles because my dad has Parkinson's. I'd rather him not have Parkinson's and just, you know, be running because I want to run, you know what I mean? Which of course that's part of it. But at that time, it's just like, fuck this, dude. Like, I don't fucking want to do this, dude. I don't want to be running for Parkinson's. You know, I don't want to be filming this shit. I don't want to be talking to my dad who's slurring words, you know, and losing the abilities of doing this, you know. And so what comes like, oh, it's going to be all fun is like, it's just fucking annoying, you know. It's stupid, like, you know. And I kind of get that thing of just like, I don't fucking care about this. Nobody fucking cares about this. And I don't care about running, and I don't want to have Parkinson's, and I don't want to deal with this, and I don't want to be a caregiver, and I don't want my dad to have this. I don't want to do any of this. I don't care. I'm not excited for this 20-mile run. You know what I mean? I'm not excited about doing a podcast. I wasn't doing a podcast at this time, but I'm not excited about doing a documentary. You know what I mean? And then like kind of being like feeling guilty or ashamed that I'm like doing something creative and enjoying a creative process about something that I'd rather not be dealing with. You know what I mean? So it's like this mixture of like, ugh, like this is, what am I doing this for? Like, and so, and then I'm out there running while, like, well, I'm on a run now, you know, like, great. This isn't fun. Like, now I'm just running for hours thinking about this, like, and it just becomes overwhelming. And it's just, you know, that's the feeling of that, is just all of that kind of repeating and going on. And like, you know, I think about people who would send me messages on Instagram too. The people who had Parkinson's, like, really love what you're doing. We can tell how much you love your dad and stuff. And I think about like, their story's better. Their story's more important, not than my dad's, but than me talking about what am I even doing out here? Is this just for me? Like, is this opportunistic to just be like, oh, you know? I still struggle with that kind of stuff, but I have to check down with people to understand. And I think anybody going through a creative thing like this long enough probably deals with this, especially if it's a personal story. And so at those times, it's, oh, this is going to be a great 20-miler, and then just not wanting to do it, not wanting to be out on the run, you know. And that would change probably a half an hour from that moment. It changed, you know, and it would change again and change again.
You know, it's funny that you bring that up, because I never really dwelled on how you would perceive the process from the point of view of feeling that it was, you know, self-fulfilling, to some extent. And I totally understand it's such a human thing to feel. So, and again, it's like, you know, what we get to see with, you know, especially in these vignettes where you're running, you know, much like your father and your mom, is you're kind of granting us that access to this internal thing that you're going through, and it's real, and you know, I'm certain, you know, whatever the context is, others regarding it, whether it's Parkinson's, I mean, it applies to so many different things. It's really great to see that. And then I would also say, just hearing you talk about it now is also just equally, I think, a really great thing. And you know, and I've always been ready to remind you of, your story is very important, and you know, it's great that we're doing it for what it is, and what a great way to honor your dad. And I think it's, you know, it's admirable. I've always said that that you guys are, that, you know, you were doing this and everything about it. So it's really fascinating to kind of see your thought process as you're going through it, and being like, wait, I'm filming this. I don't want to film this. I shouldn't have to be filming this. This is, you know, the impetus for it is this thing that you're dealing with. So it's really interesting to see that. And definitely, you're definitely in it. And I know towards the end of the episode, and I'm jumping ahead for a second, you definitely recap it. But what is wonderful about that recap is, you kind of circle back to the theme that you've brought up a couple times is, I just wanted to have a connection with my dad. And you see him at that moment. There's a little bit of peace in your voice with that realization of kind of like, oh yeah, it seems like while you haven't convinced yourself of it entirely, you're reminding yourself kind of what the greater good of this is for others.
I talked about this a little bit to you before we started, is how much running that long distance strips away, being that tired and being that worn out, and electrolytes and glycogen all being dropped, and tired, and it really, emotions sit right on top, very raw. And I think anybody who's run ultras or marathons or long distances probably can relate to this. Or if you've done anything incredibly difficult where you're really tired, those emotions are right there. And after that run, and then fast forward 6 years to looking at that moment, that night, not knowing how much stuff we would get to do together, and how important the memories were, and how this choosing to do this documentary urged me to continue to do things with my dad and push forward and ask questions that maybe I wouldn't have done, and be really vulnerable and open and do some exciting things that I may not have done if we didn't choose to do this. And I may be living at this point with more regret and frustrations and things I didn't do, but instead what I have is all of these memories, all these wonderful, beautiful things that we're going to see as this comes on. And as you and I review these videos, like, oh, that moment, oh, this thing happened. Oh, we did this together. We ran a marathon together. Like, all of these things we did together because we said yes to this. And the whole point of it was to connect with my dad more. And now, certainly having a son now, in reviewing all this stuff, I get to share that all with him too. And it's so, like, at the end of the night, it's tiring. It's a long process. Like we've talked about, this documentary can be a marathon, which, it's hard to stick with it. There's a lot of things, ups and downs of this process. But at the end of the day, as we start to, cross the finish line, as we bring this out to the public, it's all worth it, and we had such wonderful connection during that time, and thank God I kept with this thing. Thank God I did, for, and again, we both hope that Run4Ben does well, and people, connect with it. But like I've said before, is kind of really got my payoffs kind of really already happened, which makes me think about that creative process of being like, oh, am I doing this for me? Like, well, yeah, I did do it for me. And what I got was really wonderful memories with my dad, and things we did together, and so it really paid off for me already, even if this was never released, and I'm fulfilled already. So now to release it just is bonus.
Anything like this is self-serving to some extent, but it's just like, what do you do with it? And I think, I know that, if we get this out, if it gets out to anybody and has like a positive impact, I mean, that's a huge win. Like that's what it's about. That's why, I know from my perspective, this wasn't like, all right, this is the golden ticket, this is, I knew that the cause was greater than the process.
Yeah.
So that's great. And I'm, it's really awesome to go over that and be able to go over that and have this opportunity with you to do that. For me, it's great.
Well, I guess I'm going to ask a question now too. And I also want to say something first, and then I'll kind of see if I can frame it in a question after that too. But first, I wanted to just say to anybody watching this or listening to this was a marathon that I ran, that I called you about, that my dad is the one who had Parkinson's. It was my family. And I called and you said, yes, let's do a 7 to 10 minute little short documentary, and agreed to that during the pandemic. And then it grew and it grew and it grew. And it's 6 years that no matter what, I was going to be in it. But this was optional for you. So for you to continue to show up throughout these years when there were difficult times. I mean, there was a time, we'll talk about this, but we'll bring it up here. Is like, we had a conversation about like not doing this and not going forward with it, which is, we almost ended it and we had to talk through it, for very real reasons, and I think anybody who's been through a creative process like this has had these type of things. It's not easy. For me to be in it, that's one thing. But I was thinking about today how much you've gone through, how much you've given up, how much time that you've put into it. And I just can't thank you enough for being, a part of all of this, and for seeing the vision and for caring about it as much as you've cared about it. You didn't have to go through it. And there are other people who didn't stick with it, who came onto the project, who were going to do this or that or the other thing. And they came and they added what they added at the time, but then left for other reasons. And you could have done that at any moment as well, rightfully so a lot of times, and you didn't. So I just wanted to say how much it means to myself, certainly to my family. We become, friends with the family and other people because of this. So, I guess to wrap up that extended thank you and just letting people know what it means to have you, be the director and creator of this, and learning as you went too. I want to hear a little bit from your side about like coming onto the project, saying yes, but then having it continue through the ups and downs and difficult times. Like, why? You know what I mean? I mean, that's the blunt way, but like, yeah, broadly, what made you stick through all this, and like, I'm not going to try to frame it any different. Why?
First of all, thank you. That's very kind of you to say that. I appreciate it. I don't want to not stick with it. I want to see it, that's why it just took us a long time to kind of figure out what to do with it, but this is what we're doing now. So it's happening. I mean, the thing is, it was the process. It was very unique because firstly, because of the pandemic. So collaboratively speaking, it was like there was a lot of just relying on what you were shooting. So there was just like, okay, we'll get it. And I certainly, especially at the beginning, and this is a theme that'll recur as well, is as we went on making this, we got smarter about what we put on video and covered more bases. So definitely in the process of editing these, it's more work to cobble together things where I'm like, damn, I wish we had X, Y, and Z. But it always was, whatever it was. And there was a lot of really amazing experiences that I had through the process of this 6-year process. I've been with you on a couple of the marathons and experiences I would have never had just even going to Detroit twice, and then, being hurled from a bicycle in the middle of a marathon a couple of times would have happened. Yeah. But, at times I think my frustration would come from probably the unknown and not knowing where we were going to land, this project. And also, because as you said, a lot of people helped us out. Some did amazing stuff for us, and it is all, we will credit all of those people when it happens. Definitely, especially in episode 2, Jim Harmon was our camera person on that, and he did a wonderful job for those interviews in San Pedro. But at times it felt very isolating for me, in that creatively speaking, because it was like it was a one-man show, and we were always trying to get someone to help us with post-production and offering them so little because we had no money. And I totally understand that. So at times that would get frustrating, and begrudgingly, this process that we're doing currently, I'm doing all the post-production work on the episodes and the podcast, which I'm fine. And I'm learning so much. But it's definitely, I think, because I'm not great at it, it's a challenge. So it's not always as fun as I would want it to be, but that's okay. There's some growth from that happens. So yeah, so I think some of that definitely, I would waver in and out. And especially there was definitely times over the 6 years where you were maybe filming some stuff, but I was removed because I was, I'm in California, especially once you move back to Detroit, I'm removed to an extent from everything. And just relying on your footage. And then on top of that, more so in the past, I was working on film and television projects of varying scales, and I would become completely consumed by them because I was working so hard and so many hours, and it would just, my gray matter would be burnt out by the end of the week. So, I think I think there's definitely something to be said for kind of the delayed gratification of this experience that may have been frustrating. Whereas, you want to have something to show for it, and 6
Yeah.
years of people going, so how's that documentary going? How's that going? And it's just like, it's like, the glacial movement, definitely, was like something that would be frustrating at times. And like you said, we had our personality, bump ups every once in a while. I mean, nothing ever really got crazy, serious, but I think, in the creative process, everybody has a vision and trying to work together. And from your perspective, I would imagine it's very challenging for you because, you're the moneymaker. It's your story and your personal life that we're splaying out. So I can imagine, what that must feel like as well. So I'm just I'm just making the biscuits, I'm just back in the kitchen. So yeah, I can imagine what that feels like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I hope the question came off correctly for you and for other people, is the why is not like, the why is just, I think, is more of just a thank you. And it's like, it's not my project and you've been on it. And so I don't want the why to sound like that. The why is just, I think, people will see that I talk a lot about things, and I just want to make sure, I guess I'm just want to make sure that everybody knows how important it is and how it's been you and me pushing this, rock up the hill together for a long time. And I think my why is pretty clear. It's my dad, and I was running. So it's pretty clear as to like, well, I'm doing it because it's, I'm going to be with the guy all the time. And I just think it's so important to understand how wonderful it is to have creative friends that say yes to things and to stick with each other through very difficult, vulnerable things and frustrating things and differences of opinions. And if we could go back right now, go back to when we first started this, what we would do differently. And that's how much I know. That's how I know how much we've learned. Is I'm like, no. Here's what we would do first: is get this lined up, like pre-production lined up at the start. Like, what are we getting? What is our, I know it's a documentary, you have to go with it, but you can have a better framework. And so at the end of this, for our next project, we'll know better what to do.
But circling back to episode 2, there's a right turn. For the first time on camera in our series, we meet your wife, Britta.
Yeah, she, another one of the people. We'll see more of her in that, but you'll never see as much as she actually contributed. She shows up in this one, and yeah, we have a beautiful baby boy, and she's taking care of him right now while I'm in Chicago. I can go on and on. I'm sure we'll talk more about her.
The thing that's great about the both of you is you both have that trust, where she had trusted you and never really gave us any grief on how this documentary experience would interrupt her life and yours and yours collectively. So she was always a good sport, like everybody in your family. So she gets major props for that.
Yep. It wasn't easy. We had our arguments and things like that too. There were tough times for sure dealing with that kind of stuff. But overall, we're here. She's excited as anybody for this to come out, probably for it to be done.
I think we've covered all of our topics for episode 2. The button on the episode, which I think is just perfectly characterizes this experience, is you're having this really lovely confessional. You're tired. You've just run 20 miles and you're talking about the connection with your father. And right in the middle of it, a car revs its engine and just totally cuts the seat, breaks it up, and just kind of brings us back to the reality of making this documentary. And I thought that was just a really great way to end the episode of, in a way that just kind of brings it up and makes it a little more light at the end. That's a wrap on episode 2, Off and Running, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
See you next time.